On tonight's show, we take a closer look at how the world perceives them and how, despite being confronted a host of controversies, have they cultivated foreign relations with the rest of the world. Let's begin with President Donald Trump. Joining us for this discussion is Mr. Brett Yonkers, who's an analyst joining us from Belgium. We're also joined by Mr. Fadel Abdul Ghany, who's an activist joining us from Doha. Thank you both for joining us. Mr. Yonkers, let me begin with you. Now, we're hearing a lot of talk about the President of the United States possibly being impeached. There's scandal after scandal. The latest news of how migrants are being treated at the southern border has had the world shocked. How have Trump's domestic policies impacted his perception, first and foremost, as the leader of America, but amongst the general global population?
Well, I can, of course, speak about the way the population in Belgium and in Europe at large. You hear a lot of talk about President Donald Trump, and most of it is in a quite negative way, of course, because Donald Trump is seen. I've seen it said in a way that I think is very clear, is actually very true. You can call Donald Trump basically America without the humanitarian face that they would normally wear. So Donald Trump basically expresses let's say the underbelly of the United States itself. He represents a sort of unmasked imperialist and very aggressive hawkish attitude. However, the problem that you have seen, of course, with Donald Trump is that he has a tendency to change moods quite a lot, to change his decisions quite a lot. We've seen this especially when talking about North Korea. At the same time, Donald Trump has been threatening North Korea with total nuclear annihilation, but then last week he was the first ever sitting American president to visit them. So when you see people's thoughts about him people are very confused in general, and people have this idea that Donald Trump is not the kind of person who should have been in the White House in the first place, and is kind of being pushed around by the advisors that he puts there in the background around himself.
Right, and he talks a lot about how he was a businessman before this, but do you think he's also treating America like it's a business?
I think that's basically how he goes with it. And we have to bear in mind that even when Donald Trump was a businessman, he actually went bankrupt several times with several of his businesses. And of course, we have to hope that he does not believe that he can bankrupt the country and be bailed out like he was when he was a businessman, because that's not that easy when you bankrupt the country. So I think he didn't say that he's going to run America like a business. The problem is that is actually a terrible way to rule a country. So yeah, I believe that this what he believes is his experience that made him a good candidate for the presidency. That this experience is actually a little bit pointless when it comes to worldwide politics, or geopolitics, which goes far beyond the simple the financial concept of running a business.
Right. And going to Mr. Fadel Abdul Ghany, something that Mr. Yonkers mentioned here was quite interesting, was that Donald Trump represents America without its humanitarian mask. Now, mask almost gives a connotation, or almost implies that it's something to be disposed of, and America is wearing a mask. It's a facade. Do you think Trump is representing and showing a side of America that does exist, an ugly side, but it is there?
Actually, when President Trump is starting his administration, we get a hope in Syria that after Obama withdraw from the region, President Trump will be back as a Republican and engage and try to solve the Syria dilemma and the crisis, which is like the worst humanitarian crisis in all around the world. We are talking about 13 million displaced out of Syria, inside or outside Syria. Schools and hospitals, which is unprecedented since World War II. Here, where is the leader showing themselves and letting Iran engage more in Syria? Now, unlike this, we are seeing President Trump visiting
Mr. Ghany, just on that point of Syria, we heard about Trump saying that he's going to pull out forces. He didn't do that. Do you think his policies are confused, or do you think that he does have a very clear policy, but he just tries to create a spectacle, a distraction, and then does what he wants anyways?
Not at all, actually. I visited US several times. 3 months ago, I visited the White House and the State Department. Actually, there is something unclear for us from the one side. The Pentagon won't further interfere in Syria and want this maybe shellings and attack against civilians, especially from the Russian troops, to be stopped, actually, which is the American responsibility. But by other hand, there is like other statement like what you mentioned, the pull out of the troops, the State Department. So there is actually types of discrepancy in between the administration itself. There is no clear view or clear vision about what they're going to do with Syria. Withdraw from Syria, that means more engagement, and Iran will seize more territory at the expense of and that's also contradict what they are gonna do. They want to find Iran in Syria. That's actually here a huge contradiction, because withdraw the American, that means expansion of Iranian troops, which is actually on the border of the American territory, which is they are supporting SDF forces in Syria.
Mr. Ghany, stay with us on that point of Iran. I want to ask Mr. Yonkers here, all that it has done when it comes to Iran, it seems to have undone all the hard work of the U.S. in the past. And do you think in this case, too, that this was whimsical of him, or was there a plan?
Well, regarding the Iranian nuclear deal, the JCPOA, I think once again Donald Trump is basically carrying out the will of the war hawks in the United States. We've seen that definitely with the appointment of John Bolton and Mike Pompeo and other such people to important positions. We've seen it with former mayor of New York, Rudy Giuliani, who is openly courting the MEK, which is a terrorist organization that has massacred thousands of Iranians over the past decades, and who is now openly harboring these terrorist forces in the United States with the goal of overthrowing Iran. So when you see that Donald Trump is really trying to push for a total destruction, basically, of Iran, this is basically just carrying out the will of those people who were opposed to Barack Obama engaging in negotiations with Iran, even though these negotiations were perfectly sensible. So we know from the International Atomic Energy Agency that Iran has kept to all of its parts of the deal. They have indeed limited them their uranium enrichment, their nuclear,
right,
their peaceful nuclear energy program, and yet nevertheless, Donald Trump has decided to very hawkishly and very
Mr. Yonkers, we've seen him take a hard stance against, for example, North Korea previously. And like we talked about, he became the first sitting president to visit North Korea. He took a hard stance against China. But after the G20 summit, they've decided to put a halt on these sanctions and the tariffs. Now, let's talk about Iran. Do you think he might possibly use that same strategy here?
It is actually my hope that Donald Trump will do what he has done before, and that is basically try to funnel the blame to some of his advisors and to kick out the advisors that are the most dangerous, let's say, for international peace. So it is actually, I hope, and I think it might be possible that John Bolton might be the next, let's say, victim of the purges within the White House, and that way Donald Trump will try to gracefully back out of his war rhetoric against Iran. That would probably be the best case solution, because that way we can avoid total war in the Middle East.
But would it be graceful? Isn't all of this showing that his ultimate fall from grace, that he cannot go on one straight line? He backtracks, he changes his word, no one can trust him.
Yeah, that's when I mean that he tries to gracefully back out. That means that might be probably in his own vision. However, indeed, for most people, most analysts I've spoken with and things I've heard yesterday, I've heard an analyst say that Donald Trump is basically mentally challenged. Then I think things like that might be, of course, that is a harsh way of saying it, but I think he's definitely not capable of leading a nation, and the only reason why he leads a nation is because of this popularity contest that U.S. democracy has in fact become. So he has played the public masterfully. His electoral campaign was a gem, let's say, of electoral politics. But now that he is there, it is basically it's turned out to be somewhat of a disaster.
Right. And on that point, thank you so much, Ms. Brett Yonkers, for joining us and talking to us. Mr. Ghany, going back to you and talking about how Trump is the world leader, his leader of the free world. A Washington Post article recently stated that Trump almost spews out 12 lies a day. Now, let's talk about this in a global scenario. A leader that is being claimed as, lying left, right, and center. How is that creating a trust deficit? And how is that impacting in real-time politics?
Of course, you are totally right. There is a lot of things to be engaged in between those leaders rather than showing and taking photos. And now all of us saw this hashtag unwanted Ivanka. It's the first around the world publishing his daughter photos and how she engaged. Actually, this is now a part of a family administration, which is also unprecedented in the U.S. foreign policy. This is not Syria. We are not talking also about Libya or Lebanon. This is should be on the top democratic countries, which is unaccepted by the American. And we saw now a high level of criticism in between this hashtag. And going back to the crisis around the world, this is should be actually where is the leader proof themselves. Iranian engagement, and I disagree with your guest actually. He is against squeezing Iran, but by other hand, he's actually welcoming by his talks Iran engagement in Lebanon,
Do you
Syria,
think he's doing
Iraq.
this to provoke Iran, to get a reaction and to see what happens?
Actually, that's what we hope, but till now there is no real action. And we saw how Iran is targeting the U.S. Aircraft without any response till now. This talking, actually, we are thinking that this will lead to other types of negotiation only. There is no response to Iran. Otherwise, a response Iran should be at the first stage in Syria, whereas the Iran expand and reach to the Mediterranean Sea, actually through Syria and through
Right.
With Hezbollah. Here is the real action actually should be taken.
Right. And Mr. Ghany, something I do want to talk about is the fact that when the narrative about any policy is coming out of the United States, can the people trust it? I mean, it seems like there is a rift undergoing in the administration itself. In 2018, there was a New York Times article which talked about how there is this process of undermining Trump within the White House, and it was created a lot of controversy, a lot of stir. It seems like the administration is not on the same page. Now, with that, how is that determining foreign policy? How is that impacting foreign policy? And how are other countries circumventing that?
Of course, that hit your credibility as the largest power all around the world, and that's affect your allies as well. We are ourselves as seeking for democracy and allies for the Western. They should support us. But let me give you a very clear example about what's going on in using the chemical weapons, which is mass destruction weapons all around the world. And here should be a total engagement. There is promises not only from the U.S. administration, but as well from the UK and France. If the Assad regime use the chemical weapons again, there is decisive action should be implemented. But where is this action? Assad is used the chemical weapons 1 month ago in Latakia, and there is only statement that okay, we have indicated the chemical weapons. Assad, the OPCW team entered Syria without any action or reaction from the United States foreign policy.
Right. On that note, thank you so much, Mr. Fadel Abdul Ghany, for joining us and talking.